Hello, and welcome back to Random Vids. So, let's take a quick break from total drama rankings, and let's go back to something that I recently just talked about last year, and that is SpongeBob. If total drama ain't my favorite show, well then my runner-up is probably SpongeBob. Because man oh man, I just love SpongeBob. I have all 12 seasons. I don't have 13 yet, but I do have 12 seasons on DVD, and I've seen them multiple times on YouTube. I know it was the classic era, the modern era, and then the trash era, whatever you want to call it. So we did a lot of SpongeBob top 10s and stuff, ranking whatever last year. So this year I decided, let's just review the episodes. Let's just, take a look at some of these episodes and just review them. Maybe I'll put them on a tier list if I'll remember. Well, I'm not going to pull out Tier Maker, but I'll say, oh, maybe this is an S, maybe this is a C, depending on the episode. So for today, let's review all the episodes from Season 1. So Season 1, in my opinion, is a fairly good one. It's a great starter season. It's, of course, one of the 3 seasons in the classic era, so there's a lot of good episodes. Not all of them are good episodes, though, but, for a starter season, it's pretty good. So without further ado, let's get into the reviewing of Season 1. I hope you enjoy. So starting off our list, we have Help Wanted. I've only seen this episode, twice probably, and that's only because this episode, for some reason, isn't on the DVD disc we have. Don't know why, I can't tell you, because I don't know. But I did end up watching it, and I mean, it's a great episode, showing off, what SpongeBob is going to be, SpongeBob's first day at the Krusty Krab, him working with Mr. Krabs and Squidward, of course, all their character introductions, and a bunch of funny lines like, the smelly smell that smells smelly, and I want my mommy, Mr. Squidward. Basically anything Mr. Krabs says in this episode is hilarious. Back when Mr. Krabs used to actually be funny instead of just being annoying. Yeah, Help Wanted, I think it's a great episode. I'd give it an A. Now, on to our second episode, and our first short of all time. So this is what our disc starts off with, or my DVD of Season 1, whatever you want to call it. Reef Blower is the one that ends up starting it off. And it's an interesting one to start off. I'm always going back and forth between whether I really like this episode or I just find it meh. Because there are some funny moments in it, but I remember, especially, the first time I watched it, I was like, huh? Okay, I was so confused on what this actually was. This is the first time we get to see, SpongeBob in Squidward's house. Well, actually, no, I think it was shown in Help Wanted, but I don't know. This one it's interesting, and there's no dialogue either, so everything is just all sound effects and stuff, which is interesting, but I only want one of those type of episodes. This episode, I'd probably give it about between a C or a B. I'm gonna give it a C. Thankfully now the dialogue is back. Now for this episode, we get introduced to Sandy, who sometimes has really, really good episodes in the season, and other times has pretty mediocre, bland, Sandy gets out of character episodes. But luckily our first episode with Sandy in it is a great one. So, obviously SpongeBob and Sandy meet for the first time, and this was actually the first episode that I watched that had Patrick in it. Any scene with Patrick in this episode is hilarious because he's always like, pinky out, and SpongeBob with his I need it thing. There's just so many things to quote and meme from the original 3 seasons, it's not even funny. But no, overall, it's a great episode, and SpongeBob learns not to go in Sandy's house without a water helmet. And Patrick does too, with his, what kind of place is this thing? Like I said, anything with Patrick in it in this episode is hilarious. So not only does Sandy get introduced to SpongeBob, but also Patrick as well. Okay, it's a great episode overall. This is I'd put this probably in A tier. Oh man, this one's another classic. It's another great one. So now SpongeBob is trying to blow bubbles, and with Patrick, I guess, as well. And Squidward is annoyed because they're messing up. They're not really messing up, but they're just being too loud. So he gets annoyed. So then he goes and tries to tell them to be quiet, but of course that doesn't work. So instead, he just ends up blowing bubbles along with them. What I love about this episode is that this is the first time we get to see SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward together. And unlike later seasons, where we're going to get to the funness of those seasons then, this is just a fun, non-Squidward torture episode where they're all just having fun together. And I mean, Squidward can literally walk away if he wants to, if he's tired of the bubbles not wanting to blow. Also love the technique, apparently, to this episode, or to blow in a bubble. Which I'm not going to explain all, but it's funny how SpongeBob does it, and Squidward tries to do it, and they end up blowing a bubble, and then Patrick with his "it's a giraffe" thing. Because it's season 1, any episode with Patrick in it is just hilarious. Okay, maybe not any episode, but a lot of the episodes with Patrick in it are hilarious. Like this one, for example. It's a great one, and I love the SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward trio, especially in episodes like this. So this one is really great. Definitely an A for me. Now we're finally at our first beach episode, and it's a pretty interesting one to start off with. So it's our first episode with Larry in it, and he's a okay character, I guess. I don't know. I don't think he's that funny in Rip Pants, or even that great of a character in Rip Pants until, like, in later episodes. He definitely starts to show more character development, character growth, and actual interesting points to his character. But in Rip Pants, it's just kind of like, well, he's there to take Sandy away. Big whoop-de-doo. So the cliche of the lady going for the more muscular man type thing is very annoying. But I think they did it decently in this episode. There was a lot of sandbagging moments, though, like with SpongeBob slowly trying to pick up the weight. And I don't really know how much I love the "you're too weak" SpongeBob cliche, because they do, or not even cliche, it's just like a running gag they try to do in the show, where SpongeBob is way too weak in some episodes, but then other episodes he's stronger than ever, which makes zero sense. And episodes like this definitely get a little but besides that, I think the rest of the episode is really good, with some funny memes here and there, some funny things overall. I'd probably give it about a B. I think it's pretty good. So for this episode, now we get to see SpongeBob and Patrick jellyfishing, right? Wrong. Instead, we get to see them torment Squidward into jellyfishing when he clearly doesn't want to. Instead, Squidward has to leave his own house because SpongeBob's being too annoying, and then has a bike accident and ends up in bandages. And guess who's there awaiting Squidward as soon as he gets home? That's right, good old SpongeBob and Patrick. I think you know where this episode's going then. They take him jellyfishing, he gets hurt along the way, he gets stung by a jellyfish twice, and the poor man can't even have peace. They just have to keep this running gag of Squidward getting tortured. What is so funny about this? And this is the first episode that really has all that Squidward torture in it. Even season 1 has it, yes. A lot of people complain about the modern seasons and their Squidward torture, but this is season 1 and no one complains about these episodes. Oh, that's right, they're the classic era. Silly me, I almost forgot. Anywho, I don't think this is the worst episode of all time, and it's definitely not the worst Squidward torture episode of all time, but it definitely, so far, is the weakest episode that we have covered. I'd give this a D, for sure. There were some funny moments here and there, like Patrick's firmly grasp it joke, and a few other things here and there, but other than that, this episode is just It's annoying watching Squidward get tortured because, unlike characters like, you see, in Total Drama, we have characters like Tyler, who is kind of their punching bag, or even like Scott for season 5. But you see, they either deserved it, or that's who we got introduced to when we first, met them. Plus, I don't think their injuries are nowhere near as bad as the injuries Squidward goes through. Yeah, this is definitely their first case and scenario of Squidward torture, and it's not pretty. And now this is the first time we get introduced to Plankton, our main villain of the series. And what's so funny about this Plankton, you may ask? He's really small. Big whoop-de-doo. No, in all seriousness, I do think this episode is really great. It's a great introduction to Plankton and him and Mr. Krabs' rivalry. And, of course, the golden spatula from Battle for Bikini Bottom is in this episode. There's some other funny jokes in here, like Plankton's record player, which is only used in this episode. And this is the laboratory thing. It's overall a great episode, and especially one of the especially like season 1. It's a really, really good one. I'd give it an A. Oh, good. I'm glad we're back to the fun Squidward, SpongeBob, Patrick episodes. Kind of like Bubble Stand in a way. Naughty Nautical Neighbors is such a underrated episode, I think. No one ever really talks about the episode, and that's a shame because I really think it's a great one. I do forget it's actually in season 1 just because of how, like, underrated it is, and I'm not saying it's forgettable, but I just forget it exists because, it's never really talked about. So, Patrick and SpongeBob end up getting mad at each other because of Squidward. So they both try to pretend to be, not pretend, but they then both try to be best friends with Squidward. So you see, Squidward is kind of getting a little payback, but not like tortured. Because Squidward played a harmless prank, and now he's kind of getting karma because of it. See, this is how you do a good SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward episode. And there's a lot of funny moments and funny quotes in here too, like SpongeBob's "the gang's all here," and any scene with Patrick in it, like Patrick and his when Squidward says he's going to play E minor and Patrick just falls asleep. There's another part too. I forget what it was, but it's another funny part. You see, this is still when Patrick was a great character, because if this was like season 6 Patrick, he probably would have punched SpongeBob and made the episode a whole lot worse. But thank God this ain't season 6 Patrick. But we're working our way up to him. Oh boy. This episode I think is just great overall. Squidward doesn't really get tortured in it. And it's overall a great episode. This is definitely an A. Boating School seems like it should be an interesting episode with SpongeBob getting his boating license. And maybe it would have been if this was the only time they would have had an episode like this. But no, they have to have that running gag of SpongeBob failing his driver's test, so he always has to go back to boating school. I don't know what it is, but a lot of the boating school episodes, especially the earlier ones, were just so dry. I don't really like the running gag of SpongeBob failing his driver's test and then Mrs. Puff going to jail every single time. I swear, Mrs. Puff goes to jail more than anyone else in the show. Although other people deserve it more. Like, I don't know, Mr. Krabs, Patrick. This is a fairly good introduction, though, to Mrs. Puff. It's a simple way of saying, hey, SpongeBob's not a good driver. Basically, the best parts of this episode is Patrick. Can't believe I'm saying that, but hey, this is season 1 Patrick, remember? I like how he's trying on SpongeBob's pants, and he's trying to help SpongeBob out. And yeah, even if it is, quote-unquote, ended up being cheating, it still ended up being funny to see, and it was a decent episode overall. I'd give it probably a B. This is S tier. I'm just going to say it right now and then, because what other tier would pizza delivery get? Of course this is going to be S tier. So this is really the first time we got to see a SpongeBob Squidward episode. And one of the 2 times we really get to see a delivery episode with SpongeBob and Squidward. I don't know which one's better though, this one or Random Land. I would have to really think about that because they're both really good. This one is the classic one though, and man, it's just such a great episode where they have to deliver pizza, And they did such a great job with the Squidward-SpongeBob duo. And it's fun seeing Squidward play along with it. A lot of SpongeBob's chaosness opposed to just being grouchy the whole time. Well, this was also before he turned one-dimensional too, so... And this was also before the whole cast turned one-dimensional, so I mean... they all still have a lot of funny moments. Um, but yeah, it's a great, great episode overall, and I love the ending where Squidward stands up for SpongeBob. You see, no matter how much SpongeBob may annoy Squidward, Squidward still has SpongeBob's back. That's what I like about the duo. Such a great duo for a great, great episode, and I think this is still, in my opinion, my favorite episode from Season 1. Easy S tier. This one's another pretty chaotic episode. So, SpongeBob's house ends up getting dranken by nematodes, so now him and Patrick try to build a brand new house. And that ends up going horribly wrong, but the process of it is funny, seeing Patrick just getting hurt. Then they end up building a tiny house, and that doesn't work. So instead, SpongeBob tries to sleep with Patrick, but, you know, that only goes so well because Patrick is loud and obnoxious and chaotic when sleeping, and SpongeBob's like the complete opposite. So then he tries sleeping at Squidward's house, which is, yet again, just super hilarious because Squidward's like half asleep, and he's like, yeah, sure, you can sleep over. But then realizes he's letting SpongeBob in his house, and it's like, okay, yeah, never mind. It's just so, all these little goofy moments of this episode make it just one of my favorites from Season 1 easily. And then the ending, of course. I also like how when SpongeBob announces he's moving away, Squidward's just throwing a party. Oh, it's hilarious. And then, of course, it ends with a brand new house being grown, I guess, by a magical seed that grew with one droplet of a tear. I think it's a great episode overall. Definitely one of my favorites from Season 1. That's an S tier. Now we get to the first episode that we see Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Such great characters in SpongeBob. Although, they're human, obviously, but I don't know, that just makes it interesting. I also love their chemistry with Barnacle Boy being kind of like a Squidward, and Mermaid Man almost kind of like a Patrick in a way, but just better. Well, okay. Maybe not Season 1 better, but definitely as the seasons go on, with Patrick getting worse and worse. Definitely better. Although, I don't really think the introduction episode is really my favorite episode with them in it. In fact, I think it's one of the weaker episodes, because they don't really do much in this episode except complain, whine, and see how slow they move. And SpongeBob keeps trying to reunite them and get them back into doing their show again, which I guess that's somewhat interesting, but it just doesn't make any sense. It's just too much all over the place for me. Plus, they're just really... Plus, Mermaid Man is extremely out of character in this episode, I think. Because normally he's, like, more kind of dumber and accepting to things, opposed to just being the grouchy old man. I don't know. There were some funny things in this episode, like Mermaid Man and when you say evil, and Mermaid Man's nap. But other than that, I think the episode is just eh. I'd give it probably like a D+. And now we have another character introduction, except he's not a main character, he's a side character. But he's used a lot more in the modern SpongeBob episodes. But, man, now we got another classic episode. And this time around, SpongeBob's making patties as he always does, but now he has a rude customer come in, a really picky one at that, named Bubble Bass, who wasn't really a big fan of SpongeBob. So he ends up pretending that SpongeBob didn't put the pickles on, which makes SpongeBob's mind all messed up. So anytime he cooks patties, I shouldn't say cooks, but like when he puts them together, he always does the order wrong because of that, and it just gets worse and worse. So Mr. Krabs sends him home for the day. But that doesn't help at all because then Squidward cooking doesn't really work that well, and the customers leave. So Mr. Krabs goes back to SpongeBob's house and tries to help him out. Wow. Is there ever another time that Mr. Krabs wants to help out SpongeBob? Not until later seasons, but Jeebus. Like, Mr. Krabs actually wants to help someone. I'm impressed. Good job. So when SpongeBob finally gets his confidence back, he cooks another patty for Bubble Bass, and he pretends that the pickles are missing again, but of course they're not. I don't know. This episode is really great, and it it introduces Bubble Bath, who I think is a really funny character overall. Sure, he can be considered the lazy bum, but he can be interesting and funny too. Pickles, I think, is a pretty good episode overall. I'd give it a B. And now back to another stupid boating school episode. Just kidding. I mean, yeah, we are at Mrs. Puff's boating school, but only for like a few minutes. So, SpongeBob is now the hall monitor, so he makes a long speech about being the hall monitor, and by the time he's done, class is done. Which is kind of fun. I like how everyone's just snoring away, including Mrs. Puff. But because SpongeBob's really sad, Mrs. Puff lets him be hall monitor for the whole day, or for the rest of the day, which was pretty hilarious to see. So then SpongeBob tries to, I guess, fix things in Bikini Bottom, like a broken traffic light, which all the cars somehow go in one direction and they all just crash into each other. Okay then. And he does a lot of other silly stuff, but my favorite parts end up coming when Patrick gets introduced. That's something you'll never hear me say in the newer seasons. My favorite parts are when Patrick's there. But basically, SpongeBob catches him for eating ice cream, and it gets all over the floor. And then Patrick's like, "I'm a bad person." It's just funny. And then Patrick is now the assistant. And then the whole, "Have you seen this man?" And Patrick's like, "Yeah, it's the maniac. Take him away." There's just so many goofy moments in this episode. And then, of course, it turns dark, so now Patrick's afraid. See, this is what I like about Season 1 Patrick, that he's not this, like, jerk and, like, "Oh, I'm not afraid of the dark." Instead, he's actually, like, admitting that he is, which I like about Season 1 Patrick. There's a lot of other funny moments in this episode. And then Mrs. Puff goes to jail again. But at least it makes sense. But still, it just gets annoying of that being a running gag. But other than that, I think this is a great episode, and it's really hilarious. This is definitely an A. Yet again, another great SpongeBob episode. So now SpongeBob takes a jellyfish home, and they end up dancing the music. During the night, the jellyfish invites all of his friends, and they end up throwing a party, which SpongeBob isn't really too pleased about. So he tries to kick them all out. That doesn't really work until I guess Gary starts playing music, and that gets the jellyfish to leave SpongeBob's house. Now, maybe the story itself isn't really the greatest, but you see, even the title is telling you it's not about the story. It's about the jam. And they have two really great songs in this episode. The one that SpongeBob and the jellyfish is dancing to, and of course the one at the end. Both are just so great and easily my favorite songs of Season 1. And overall, just great SpongeBob songs. The music alone gets this episode in S tier. It's amazing. Oh boy. Now we've reached our first annoying Sandy episode. Sandy can be a great character in episodes, but then other times she just gets so annoying, and this is definitely one of those episodes. Not as annoying as some other ones, like there's definitely worser ones, but I don't know. I was never really a big fan of Sandy's rocket. Sandy makes a rocket and gets mad at SpongeBob for wanting to tag along. Huh? That's just so random and odd, because usually, Sandy and SpongeBob, they're like best friends. So Sandy doesn't usually mind when SpongeBob comes along, but I guess SpongeBob messes up things a lot of the time. But you see, Sandy is usually never like, "Well, that means you can't come." Usually she's more like, "Okay, we'll just try not to mess anything up this time." Which ends up happening then when she finally says yes to SpongeBob coming. But I swear, she never smiles at all in this episode. She just seems so grouchy the whole time. And I mean, yes, SpongeBob and Patrick did end up stealing her rocket, but half of it, if not most of it, was Patrick's fault. A lot of that does definitely get very annoying, with SpongeBob doing what he was told, and then Patrick has to come and ruin it for him. At least in later episodes, Sandy blames them both, opposed to just SpongeBob. That gets really annoying. SpongeBob this, SpongeBob that. I can't believe SpongeBob did. Okay, Sandy, we get it. Enough. SpongeBob and Patrick are apparently so stupid in this episode, too, because they end up landing back on the Bikini Bottom, but then they think that they're on the moon? huh? I don't know. I just think this episode is pretty weak, especially in comparison to other season 1 episodes. The only part I did like, though, was Squidward. Other than that, the rest of the episode is pretty pointless and dumb. Now this is more like it. What I like about classic SpongeBob episodes is that I can enjoy characters like Mr. Krabs and Patrick, when usually they're characters that are a lot harder to enjoy in newer seasons. So, Squeaky Boots is a hilarious Mr. Krabs episode, where he buys Pearl boots for her birthday, and of course, she don't like them, so Mr. Krabs tries to give them to SpongeBob instead. I think SpongeBob has to pay for, I don't remember. But anywho, the squeaking gets really annoying to Mr. Krabs, and ends up having dreams about the boots, and everything in his house makes squeaking noises and stuff. And then he ends up getting delusional, and it all ends up good. It gets it so bad that Mr. Krabs ends up stealing SpongeBob's boots, hides them under the floorboard, but even then, it still haunts him. So now he has to eat the boots. Okay. It's just such a simple yet funny episode, and while the squeaking may get annoying to some people, I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was a hilarious episode, and the squeaking doesn't get annoying to me. And it's nice seeing Mr. Krabs getting, karma for what he does. And it's nothing, he didn't do anything too bad, but it's nice seeing, him get what he deserves. It's a great episode. Easy S tier. What would happen if SpongeBob wanted to be a jellyfish? Well, then you get the episode Nate Your Pants, where SpongeBob wants to become a jellyfish. Okay then? We've seen SpongeBob become a bunch of different stuff, especially in, the newer seasons, but now he wants to be a jellyfish. Okay then. There's some funny parts in this episode, any scene with Squidward in it is hilarious. I like the whole, I'll give him a week, I'll give him 11 minutes joke. And, the end where they all throw a party for SpongeBob for coming back, I guess. I guess they all could read his mind that he was going to come back eventually. I guess they were all just waiting there until he came back. I don't know. It's such a goofy episode overall. It's simple, but it's a great one. SpongeBob ends up learning, maybe being a jellyfish ain't quite as fun as you first thought. I think it's a pretty good episode. I'd probably give it a B. Oh, now we're playing the game Opposite Day, I see. So there is some funny moments in this episode, like anytime SpongeBob and Patrick try to be opposite, or when Patrick holds his breath, I guess. Actually, no, that wasn't really that funny, but at the time I thought it was funny when I first saw it. But anywho, I also like the parts where SpongeBob and Patrick pretend to be Squidward in their oppositeness. I thought that was really hilarious too. But the story itself is just, I don't know. So Squidward tries to sell his house, and of course SpongeBob and Patrick are being annoying as always. So he ends up making up Opposite Day to make them quiet down for a little bit while he can try to sell his house. But that backfires, and they end up going in Squidward's house as soon as his house is about to get sold to the, I forget what she is, but basically a lady came to look at Squidward's house, and because it's quote-unquote opposite, they had to say all the horrible things about Squidward's house. And by the time Squidward notices and goes in, she's had enough, and she's ready to leave, leaving Squidward stuck there. Big whoop-de-doo? Okay? At least in this episode, Squidward isn't really getting, physically tortured at all, but he is getting, more mentally tortured, I'd say, because SpongeBob and Patrick have once again ruined his plans. We have to have this stupid cliche of Squidward getting tortured. I don't know why, but they love doing it. Besides some of that, I do think the episode is decent overall. I'd give it probably a C, the greatest. This one's a really good one. So in this episode, this is almost kind of like the very first meetup of a lot of the different SpongeBob characters. So the Krusty Krab isn't really getting a lot of people, so they end up putting on a play for everyone to come and watch. So the people performing are Pearl, Gary, Um, Someone else definitely, but I forget who. Plankton, that's who. And then of course Squidward, which has some funny scenes. But unfortunately, the crowd doesn't really like Squidward's play, which Squidward, of course, is mad that they don't like his talent. But then SpongeBob cleaning the floor is apparently talent, so whatever. I can't be mad. It's a great episode overall, an easy A tier. It's just so great. Such a great episode overall. Looks like the next episode should be fun, because that's the title of the name. So here we have another Plankton episode, and Plankton is trying to be nice for once. Big surprise. Actually, I guess he's more doing it to steal the Krabby Patty, but still, it's a great episode where we get to see a lot of SpongeBob and Plankton. Not rivalry, but like they join together and they kind of help each other out, I guess. I shouldn't say they help each other out, but I don't know. It's a hard... I don't know what the word is, but they become friends. And of course, they sing the fun song. They go see the movies together, but of course, it's revealed that Plankton is just trying to steal the formula. But I think it's overall a pretty fun episode. I'd give it a B. Now we've hit another beach episode, and we have Muscle Bob Buff Pants. Ugh. This is easily one of my least favorite episodes of Season 1, and that's just because the story just doesn't really go anywhere. We have one of my favorite running gags of SpongeBob, and that is SpongeBob being weak. And by favorite, of course, I mean least favorite. I was just being sarcastic there. I don't know why they have to do this stupid thing where anytime they mention SpongeBob's strength, he all of a sudden, just like that, turns weak. I don't understand that. Which I think is just so dumb, because then we got him trying to work out, and then him trying to get help from Sandy. That doesn't work out. So then he tries these anchor arms, and apparently that doesn't work either. Well, I guess it is just balloons, basically, but yay. The whole joke of SpongeBob being weak is just so dumb. Then, of course, SpongeBob Ghost makes a fool of himself, and everyone believes that he actually is strong. Sandy signs him up for the competition without asking him, and just all the usual annoying stuff. I know exactly how this episode is going to go before I even watch it. SpongeBob's going to make a big fool of himself, and then they're all going to get mad at him, etc., etc. It's such a boring mess of an episode of Season 1. And it's easily one of my least favorites. This is our first F tier, I would say. It's just such a messed up story. Or, it's not messed up, but it's just such a dumb story overall. Next one on our list is Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost. This episode actually isn't that bad. It's another one of those underrated SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward episodes. So, SpongeBob and Patrick break into Squidward's house. Again. This time around, though, Squidward kind of has a plan, and he pretends that he's a ghost because SpongeBob and Patrick ruined one of his, I guess, creations that looks like him, and they think he died, and he turned into a ghost, which is really hilarious. So Squidward plays along with their game and makes them do everything that he says, which, that's really refreshing, instead of just getting mad, booting them out, and then they somehow sneak back into his house again. So already, it's a great episode. And then we get to see them doing everything for Squidward. Oh, yes. Finally, after all these Squidward torture episodes, the 2 Squidward torture episodes we got so far, Squidward finally can get back on SpongeBob and Patrick. There's a lot of funny parts of this episode, like when Patrick gets a watermelon, SpongeBob having to play music with a tissue, and when Squidward finally reveals himself that he's not dead, the first thing that comes out of SpongeBob's mouth is that he literally just blurts out, "You're bold." I don't know, something about that is just so hilarious. And then they try to bury Squid. I don't know, it's just such a goofy episode. There's no Squidward torture in here. I think it's a great Season 1 episode, for sure. It's an easy A tier for me. for this episode, this is our first big main episode with Mr. Krabs' daughter, Pearl, in it. Yeah. I don't know. I don't really have too many words for this episode. I think it's a pretty great one overall, with SpongeBob being Pearl's new date since her old boyfriend broke up with her. Oh boy. But no, they end up going. I guess Pearl ends up having a decent time then, because she ends up telling SpongeBob, I had a fun time. SpongeBob though thinks that everything went wrong, but Pearl had a fun time. Then they sing the "Do the Sponge" song, which is definitely my least favorite part of the episode, because the song isn't that catchy at all, and I just find it rather annoying. And then they end up throwing SpongeBob and Pearl out of the building. I don't know how I really feel about this episode. I think it's pretty good. It's not my favorite Pearl episode ever, but it's fine. I'd give it probably a C. Oh man, we're back to that funny Squidward versus SpongeBob stuff. So this is one of the first times we get to see a Squidward-SpongeBob rivalry episode. And it's great seeing them both playing on with it, instead of just the usual Squidward annoyed at SpongeBob, SpongeBob happy all the time, Squidward gets tortured, end of story type episode. Now they're both I shouldn't say they're really mad at each other. They just both got really competitive, especially SpongeBob, who ends up working up Squidward, and they both end up getting competitive. Because guess what? It's time for Employee of the Month, and SpongeBob somehow thinks that it's going to be Squidward, so he has to get tough and strong to make sure Squidward will not get Employee of the Month. But anywho, during the night, they both won't even sleep without staring at each other. Then they both make a bunch of traps for each other. So on the way to the Krusty Krab, they both end up walking into each other's traps. I just think it's so hilarious. And it's funny seeing both of them running to each other's traps, not just Squidward running into each other's traps. I think it's overall a great episode of Season 1. Definitely like a classic, a great Squidward SpongeBob episode. I'd give this one, between a B or an A. It's tough. Now we've reached our first Halloween episode, and man, what a great one to start off. So this is the first episode we get to see the Flying Dutchman in, and man, it's a great, wonderful episode from Season 1. So SpongeBob is not scary enough, or I should say, he's the one who keeps getting scared, but no one is scared of him. So he ends up having Patrick try to, I guess, make him a Halloween costume that makes him scary. There's a lot of funny... Anything with Patrick in this episode is hilarious. Like Patrick and his, oh no, don't tell me, I know I can do this. And Patrick and his, I don't know who I am. There's just a lot of funny moments of this episode. It's hilarious. And I like how Patrick creates SpongeBob as a circle, and it ends up being that Patrick shaved SpongeBob down to just his brain. Even Patrick's afraid of SpongeBob at the end. The Flying Dutchman is. Everyone's afraid of SpongeBob. And then the screen just kind of goes to black as SpongeBob says, don't worry, it'll grow back. Man, such a great, wonderful episode from Season 1. Oh, I'd probably give this one an S. It's just so good, and it's so hilarious, too. I don't really know how I feel about this episode. A lot of people consider this the worst episode of Season 1, which I can definitely see why people wouldn't like this episode, because it is a very odd one of SpongeBob slowly transforming from sponge to snail. Okay, then. Basically, SpongeBob and Patrick go away, and Squidward forgets to feed Gary. So when they come back, Gary is really hungry, but he doesn't want to eat his food. So Squidward has to eat it and pretend, oh, look, Gary ate all of his food. But then they find Gary sick, and they call the vet to take a look, but it was just that Gary was thirsty. And the snail plasma accidentally lands on SpongeBob, and that's when SpongeBob then starts turning into a snail. Then he ends up tormenting Squidward, and then Squidward turns into a snail, and then Patrick throws a boot at Squidward to end the episode. There's some funny moments. I like how Squidward's just running around his whole house, in the one part. I also like how Squidward eats Gary's food. And I like how Squidward literally will watch Gary just so SpongeBob and Patrick will go away for the weekend. There is a few funny jokes in this episode, but the rest, it's not my favorite episode either. I'd give this probably like a D. Ooh, this one's a really great episode. So, kind of like Jellyfishing, where SpongeBob and Patrick go and bother Squidward. That's basically how the beginning works. They're both kind of similar. Unlike Jellyfishing, though, instead of Squidward getting horribly tortured, he ends up running off to the Krusty Krab instead, and hides from SpongeBob and Patrick in there. They can't find him, but then he's stuck in the freezer for 2,000 years. But then a futuristic SpongeBob and Patrick save him, and Squidward is then in the future where everything is made of bronze. So he has to try to make his way... So he's trying to make his way away then from SpongeBob and Patrick. So he ends up going to the past with... past SpongeBob and Patrick there. So then he tries to go to the future, but then he ends up in the void. What I like about this episode is just so many funny moments in the episode. And I like how Squidward is kind of like our main character in this episode. He's a great character, and he definitely deserves some center of attention episodes. Not ones where he's getting tortured in, but just ones where he's just, being Squidward. There's a lot of funny moments in this episode, and some memes like the future moment, and when he's running through the void to try to get back to the time machine. I also like the ending where he says he's going back, because he ends up eventually making his way back to Bikini Bottom. It's a great episode overall. This one's easily an A tier. Okay, we did have some meh Sandy episodes in there, but I'm pleased to report that Sandy's back to her usual fun self in this episode. So SpongeBob and Sandy love playing karate. Unfortunately, though, karate gets in the way of SpongeBob's work. So Mr. Krabs, of course, is not pleased about that and tells SpongeBob to stop playing karate or else he's fired. And it goes well until Sandy pops up and starts playing karate with SpongeBob. But that, of course, ends up catching the eye of Mr. Krabs, and he fires SpongeBob, with SpongeBob crying miserably and Sandy realizing what she did and asking Mr. Krabs to give SpongeBob a second chance. I love how Sandy's sticking up for SpongeBob in this episode. And she's just being downright nice and just, Sandy and not this weird out-of-character Sandy. So then they try to do other things besides karate. Like they go to the park, eat sandwiches, but of course, all they want to do is just play karate. So they end up karate chopping the whole park. Mr. Krabs goes on a walk and notices, and he's actually pleased because then he ends up finding a way for Sandy and SpongeBob to do karate while at work. I also love the part where SpongeBob throws the patties on Squidward so it looks like he has hair. There's a lot of funny moments in this episode, and it's easily one of my favorite episodes of Season 1. Oh, I don't know. Between an A or S tier, I'd give it maybe you know what? I'm going to give it an S tier. It's a great episode from Season 1. Now we get to see SpongeBob dreaming of, I don't even know what he was dreaming of, getting his boating license. But then he ends up falling out of his own dream. What I really like about this episode is we get to see SpongeBob go into everyone's dreams and to see what they're dreaming of. Like Squidward at a music concert, Patrick just riding a pony, Sandy skydiving, Mr. Krabs fishing, Plankton trying to rule the world, etc., etc. There's a lot of really cool, interesting ideas to this episode. And it's overall a really great episode. What kills it for me is the ending where everyone, I guess everyone wakes up and they end up going to SpongeBob's house as he's sleeping and annoys him because I guess they woke because they were mad that he was in their dreams. What? What kind of sense is that? Even Gary's mad. Like, oh, what did SpongeBob do to you, Gary? He didn't do anything wrong. Squidward and Sandy and Mr. Krabs, yeah, that's one thing, and Plankton. But why was? I don't know. Patrick was the only one who wasn't mad at SpongeBob. Wow, usually it's the opposite way, but okay then. The ending did kind of ruin this episode for me because why would they get mad at SpongeBob for being in their dreams? Because, I'm sure SpongeBob has had dreams with all you guys in it, and he didn't complain. I don't know, the ending felt kind of off, but besides that, the rest of the episode was pretty good. I'd give it a B. For this episode, we get to see SpongeBob with the suds. Basically kind of like a cold, but I guess in a sponge form. Okay, interesting. I like the way they did this. So obviously he's sick and he can't go to work. So he ends up calling Sandy to help him go to the doctors, but instead Patrick comes over and tries to help SpongeBob that way. Usually that would be annoying because usually Patrick would just be doing stupid stuff, which he did, but at least it was funny and he wasn't like trying to hurt SpongeBob. He was trying to help SpongeBob. This is definitely the better Patrick trying to be a doctor to SpongeBob episode than the other horrible one from season 6 that we'll get to later. It was really goofy seeing Patrick try different ways to help SpongeBob feel better. There's a lot of funny quotes in this episode too. I also like when he tries to hide SpongeBob from Sandy, like the two houses thing. Eventually at the end, SpongeBob does end up going to the doctor, and he gets cured, and Patrick kind of gets a little bit of karma for not helping SpongeBob. You know what, though? He should have gotten karma for what he did in Season 6, though, because that was way worse. But overall, I think this episode was pretty good. I'd give it another B. Well, would you look at that? It's Valentine's Day in Bikini Bottom, and SpongeBob's giving gifts to everyone, and he has a gift for Patrick, too. The only problem is that it's a little late. So SpongeBob takes Patrick to the carnival, or the Valentine's Day carnival, and Patrick keeps asking where his Valentine is. And it's a chocolate hot air balloon that Sandy's driving to get to SpongeBob and Patrick. I really like the usage of Sandy in this episode. I think they did a good job with that. So SpongeBob takes Patrick on the top of the Ferris wheel to, I guess, look for the hot air balloon, but it doesn't end up showing up. So SpongeBob kind of has to go for plan B and gives him a handshake, which Patrick is a little annoyed about because I think he was expecting a lot more. So eventually he ends up accepting it, but then when he hears all the other gifts that SpongeBob gave everyone else, he gets mad and he ends up basically tearing the carnival apart. Okay then. And then towards the end of the episode, the balloon does end up arriving, and it takes a while for them to get Patrick to look at it. But when he does look at it, he gets all happy again, which is kind of cool. But man, that whole third scene moment with Patrick just acting like a big jerk was really annoying, and it was very unnecessary, I think. Plus, this was the first time of us seeing Patrick as a jerk. And that's a shame because every other episode in season 1, he was doing so good. He had a good running streak. Sorry, Patrick, he had to break it at Valentine's Day. I think if they would have kept Patrick's tantrum out, this episode would have been quite as bad, but because they added that in, it was just so unnecessary. Obviously, we're made to see Patrick's upset that he didn't get a great gift. I think that was pretty obvious there. I don't know, even as a kid, I thought this episode was just kind of meh. This is definitely more of a D tier, I'd give it. Although I did like the scene where SpongeBob and Patrick are trying to ride things and have a fun time, and Patrick's just looking at his hand. But other than that, this episode is pretty just meh overall. The paper. Ugh. If you've seen my older videos, you know I don't like the paper. I feel like this episode is almost kind of like Idiot Box done wrong. What happens in this episode? Squidward throws a pointless piece of paper in SpongeBob's yard. So SpongeBob finds a whole bunch of creative ways to play with this useless piece of paper. And that, of course, gets Squidward interested, and SpongeBob won't trade this little piece of paper just for Squidward to try for 1 sec. He will not trade it, because he made a deal, and SpongeBob will not break that deal. Of course he won't. So Squidward ends up giving SpongeBob all of his stuff. Oh, great. Now we're turning this into All That Glitters from Season 4. And even the shirt on his back, and then SpongeBob finally gives Squidward this piece of paper. And now we can finally see Squidward be happy with this stupid piece of paper, right? Wrong. Because everything that he tries doesn't work. I don't know why it worked for SpongeBob. You see, they made it work perfectly with the idiot box because, yes, he wasn't actually driving the box at the end of the episode. It was the garbage truck, but at least he had that moment of happiness, and it didn't feel like he was forced into doing anything. For the paper, SpongeBob just wouldn't give him this stupid piece of paper back. And I don't know, it's just a big mess of an episode. And it's a very big sandbaggy episode, too. It goes on forever and ever. There's nothing funny about this episode. It's just a big mess, and I think it's my absolute least favorite episode of Season 1. Easy F tier for me. I do not like this episode at all. Okay, this is a lot better. So now we get a pirate-themed episode. And this one we get to see SpongeBob, Patrick, and Mr. Krabs go on a pirate treasure hunt, whatever you want to call it. So it starts off with them playing a board game, and Mr. Krabs is so, invested of this board game. He loves it so much that the next day he ends up creating his own treasure hunt with SpongeBob and Patrick. There's a lot of funny moments in this episode. Literally anything with Patrick in it is funny. I love it when he ends up taking them the wrong way. He's like, "East? I thought you said west." It's just such a goofy moment. And I also love how it's SpongeBob and Patrick versus Mr. Krabs in this episode, especially as it goes on. So they end up finding the X. Mr. Krabs makes them dig it up, but then he wants a treasure. But then they wake the Flying Dutchman for being too loud, and he gives SpongeBob and Patrick two gold doubloons from the chest, and then he gives Mr. Krabs a toy plastic one. It's a great episode overall. I don't know. I just don't have words for this episode. It's great. Easily a... I don't know. Between an S or an A tier, they're both good, so I'm going to give it an A+. Another A+ episode that I like a lot is Rock Bottom. Oh, man. So this is the first time we get introduced to, Rock Bottom. SpongeBob and Patrick are coming back from Glove World, and they take the wrong bus, and that takes them down to Rock Bottom, opposed to their houses. So Patrick ends up catching a bus and doesn't tell SpongeBob to the last minute, because of course he does. So now SpongeBob's all by himself, and he tries to catch the bus back. Normally an episode like this would annoy me with them. I hate when they, try to... No matter how much they try to do something, it doesn't ever work. Like SpongeBob trying to get on the bus and it doesn't work. Usually episodes like that would annoy me, but I really like how they did it. And they did it with a lot of creative ideas. With the bus only going whenever SpongeBob is on the wrong side. And they came up with a lot of creative ideas too, like SpongeBob turning into a bench and even going to the bus station. So they made it interesting, and I really like it, because normally stuff like that would annoy me. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. If I think of one, I'll let you know. But, man, it's just such a great episode. And then a guy comes and blows up SpongeBob's balloon, and that makes him fly away. And then the episode ends with Patrick going back to Rock Bottom to save SpongeBob. Such a great episode overall, and it's easily, yet again, another one of my favorites from Season 1. And now we have another Sandy episode, this one being Texas. So I don't think this episode is definitely nowhere near as good as Karate Choppers. But I don't think Texas is necessarily a bad episode. So Sandy is homesick and wants to go back to Texas. And SpongeBob and Patrick try to cheer her up with a bunch of different things, but it doesn't end up working. She does get a little grouchy in this episode there. Then she sings the annoying Texas song, which is probably one of my least favorite songs of Season 1. Just because it's just slow, dry, bland. Let's go back to Jellyfish Jam, please. So what I really liked about this episode is where SpongeBob and basically the main cast end up throwing a party for Sandy at the Krusty Krab. Although Sandy is going to the bus to take her back to Texas, so SpongeBob and Patrick have to try to convince her to go to the Krusty Krab. And the way to do that is to make fun of Texas, apparently. And you do not make fun of Texas in front of Sandy, because she will throw a big fit. She will, literally. She made the bus turn around, and she got right off. Okay, then. Some parts of this episode just get really annoying. Some parts of Sandy get annoying in this episode. But other times, I think they did a really good job with it. And I like the ending too, where then she ends up staying due to seeing how she is home. So I'd give this episode probably about a C. Now we have another underrated episode, aka Walking Small, another beach episode, and probably my favorite, honestly, from season 1. So Plankton is going to build the Chum Bucket Mega Bucket on the beach, but there's only one problem. He is too small to get everyone away. So he ends up getting SpongeBob to help him, and his way is to tell SpongeBob to be assertive to people. And at first, it fails horribly with some funny things. But eventually, as the episode goes on, SpongeBob learns to be more assertive towards people. But unfortunately, that ends up driving the people away. But that's exactly what Plankton wanted. So when SpongeBob finds out about Plankton's plans, he ends up helping everyone out and brings back the fun to the beach. It's a great episode overall. Nothing too special, but it's good. I'd give it a B. Well, look at that. April Fool's Day and SpongeBob? What could possibly go wrong? Well, how about if you made the whole cast except for one character unlikable? And that one character, of course, is Patrick, because remember, he's the only likable character in season 1. So SpongeBob loves April Fool's Day, and Squidward is making sure SpongeBob won't play any pranks on him, although he already did play one and Squidward was about to leave, but SpongeBob begs him to stay. Instead, SpongeBob plays pranks on everyone else, but is too annoying and loud, and Squidward gets really annoyed. It's kind of funny, though, seeing SpongeBob working out front and Squidward working in the back for some reason, because usually it's the opposite. But SpongeBob ends up getting really, really loud, and Squidward gets annoying, so he plays a prank on SpongeBob, but it's too rough, and then all the people in Bikini Bottom hate Squidward because of this one little prank. Okay, it wasn't a little prank, but you get what I mean. All the pranks SpongeBob plays, no one cares, but the one prank Squidward plays, then of course everyone cares, and even leaves the Krusty Krab. So Squidward then decides he's going to say sorry to SpongeBob, but it takes a long time for him to say sorry to SpongeBob. He visits Patrick, he even visits SpongeBob, and can't even tell him because it's SpongeBob. But then, of course, when he does say sorry, that's when SpongeBob reveals an April Fool's prank to Squidward and reveals that everyone was listening to him. I don't really know how to feel towards the end of this episode. I think I'm definitely more on a Squidward side for this episode. Squidward did absolutely nothing wrong in this episode, besides, he did hurt SpongeBob a lot, but besides that, like, he got a lot of unnecessary, I don't know, this is just one of those episodes where I just really hate everyone. SpongeBob's annoying, Mr. Krabs is just there, Squidward is mean, everyone in Bikini Bottom is mean towards Squidward. I don't know, it's just such a boring, stupid episode. The only one thing I liked about this episode is SpongeBob giving the customer one thing of ice cube instead of a bunch. Besides that, the rest of this episode is dumb. I'd give it an F. Neptune Spatula. So up to this point, we didn't really meet any, like, dislikable characters because they did a really good job with their main characters at first. And not a lot of them are really unlikable. Until we hit King Neptune. He is easily one of my least favorite SpongeBob characters, or at least in these early seasons he definitely was, because he is nothing but just a big jerk in this episode. So SpongeBob pulls the spatula out, and King Neptune doesn't believe him, even though he clearly is standing up there with the spatula. So he gets, then he just turns downright mean, and versus SpongeBob in a cook-off, and while Neptune cooks a bunch of patties, SpongeBob only cooks one. But the ones Neptune created were disgusting, and the one that SpongeBob created was actually really good. At least Neptune gets what's coming towards him, and he has to end up cooking in the Krusty Krab at the end of the episode. But man, such a slog episode that has nothing in it. I think it's such a stupid episode with Neptune in it. And I like a lot of his modern, later appearances way, way better than this one. It's just such a episode. Neptune is annoying as heck in this episode. The only thing I like about this episode is Patrick with eyeballs on his pants. Other than that, the rest of the episode is garbage, and it gets another F. So with all those Fs, we finally get a decent episode again. It still isn't like A or S tier, but Hooky isn't really that bad of an episode. There is some funny parts of it, especially the beginning half of this episode, which I really like. SpongeBob, or I guess Mr. Krabs tells everyone that the hooks are in town and warns everyone. So he, especially SpongeBob, he warns SpongeBob. And Patrick tells SpongeBob that the carnival's in town, so they end up going to this quote-unquote carnival, which ends up being the hooks, which SpongeBob warns Patrick about, but Patrick doesn't listen, and he ends up getting hooked. But he ends up ends up taking a ride, and even SpongeBob joins him too. And they just start taking a ride. They go up, and then they come down. But then Mr. Krabs notices SpongeBob's missing, and he ends up tracking down SpongeBob. And tells them not to play on the hooks again. And this is where the episode gets kind of meh, because guess what happens? Patrick doesn't listen and plays on the hooks again. But SpongeBob tries to listen, but he just can't help because he really wants to ride the hooks too. So he finds a hook, takes a ride, he gets hooked. Then he has to make a big fool of himself. And yeah, you know the rest of the episode. I'd say the first half of the episode is definitely my favorite part of the episode. The second half is just meh. So overall, I'd give it probably a C tier. Not bad. And for our last episode of the day, we got Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy number 2. The second Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode, and honestly, this one is way better than their introduction. So, SpongeBob ends up winning this conch shell, and he blows it, and Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy quick come running. The only problem is that he keeps blowing it all the time for stupid tasks, and Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy have to keep doing them. Barnacle Boy finally gets annoyed and takes it away from him. And seeing how upset SpongeBob is, Mermaid Man ends up inviting him on kind of like, almost not really a road trip, but kind of like hanging out with him and Barnacle Boy for the day. Which is kind of cool, seeing him more like this type of Mermaid Man opposed to whatever he was in the introduction episode. And it's kind of cool seeing them three just hang out for the day and how annoyed Barnacle Boy is at them. And I also love the Jingle Bells song they sing randomly. It's not my favorite episode of all time. It's definitely not my favorite Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode of all time, but definitely compared to the introduction, it's definitely a way better episode. I say we end it off with the B tier. So that was me reviewing the SpongeBob Season 1 episodes. This was already an hour long. Holy cow. Just wait till we get to the seasons that have a lot to talk about. Oh, goody. That's going to be fun. So I hope you have a good day, and I will see you next time.